Nice to see you all. Welcome to the second edition of the Nature First Economy event. So in the next minutes, I would like to share a few reflections and some facts about why and how we should transition towards a nature-first economy, what some of us call a circular bioeconomy. Bio means life, an economy powered by life that prospers in harmony with nature. And if this transition is really needed, it's because after relying for more than 100 years on an extractive economy powered by fossil resources, we have reached a tipping point in human history. While it is true that this fossil-based economy has resulted in unprecedented economic growth and technological development, all that growth, or most of that growth and development, has taken place at the expense of nature, climate, and our own health, and probably our own future. Just remember, we have not only changed the climate of our planet for the first time in human history, but we are crossing its resilience boundaries due to the massive loss of biodiversity, the degradation of our natural and managed ecosystems, and the accumulations of pollutants of different types, chemicals, plastics, etc. The real challenge when you cross the planetary boundaries, when you cross the safe operating space of our planet, is basically that our planet, our environment, cannot absorb any longer for the shocks that our economy generates, which in turn, it means that it's our own economy that needs to start absorbing for its own shocks. And this is what is happening already today. If you look at the global insured losses due to the combined effects of climate change and nature degradation, they have doubled in the last 10 years compared to the previous 10 years. In the last 5 years, we have seen insured losses due to climate change and nature degradation above $100 billion systematically. And this year we might break all the records because in the first months of the year, we already had an estimated insured losses of $80 billion, half of them coming from one single event, the LA wildfires. So, of course, obviously, insured losses are only one side of the coin. The economic losses, the direct economic losses, are much higher. And here you can see an example. In a recent report published this year by the European Investment Bank and Howden Insurance Group, they estimated that the European agricultural sector loses on average 28 billion euros due to the impacts, the increasing impacts of climate change. Only 20 to 30% of those is insured, which puts a lot of pressure and risk in the food security of the future. But still, the environmental cost of the combined effects of climate change and nature degradation are much higher. And a good example is to look at what is going on with wildfires, which is a problem that probably, as you know, is accelerating globally. And a paradigmatic case is Canada. We are working with Canadian colleagues. We have one of our staff members that just traveled there because we are facing an unprecedented challenge in Canada. If you look at the last 3 years in the graph that you have on the left, all the records have been broken. And just to contextualize the environmental impacts of those wildfires, the last 3 years, the emissions connected to those wildfires, because nature is made of carbon, so the emissions related to these wildfires, to the burning of these forests, has been higher than all the other emissions from all other economic activities of Canada together. Back in 2023, when almost 20 million hectares of forest were burned, the emissions were equivalent to 4 times all the other emissions in Canada together. That is really huge. I think what is clear is that all economic sectors, all continents are going to be impacted by the combined effects of climate change and nature degradation. But obviously there are some sectors that are more vulnerable, those that are depending more directly on the weather conditions and the state of natural capital. And obviously our food systems is at the center of this perfect storm, and we will be discussing later on that. Recent scientific studies estimate that food inflation due to climate change will increase at 3.5% per year in the next 10 years. And this is not surprising at all because we are seeing already great disruptions in important food supply chains. Probably you all heard last year how cocoa prices tripled. The reason, the combined effects of climate change and nature degradation. Why that happened? More than 60% of the cocoa of the world is produced in West Africa, countries like Ghana, Ivory Coast, Cameroon. In those countries, cocoa farms in the form of monocultures relying on synthetic inputs for fertilizers and pesticides, which erode biodiversity, by the way, has developed at the expense of more than 2.5 million hectares of natural forests, eroding biodiversity, throwing emissions. The result is highly degraded landscapes that are not resilient anymore to climate change and extreme events, in a moment when extreme events are becoming more frequent and intense than ever. This is basically what happened in the last years in West Africa. Heat waves followed by the spread of viruses, followed by torrential rain, followed by the spread of fungi. Cocoa production collapsed, and still didn't recover in West Africa. But this year, we have seen a very similar trend in the coffee industry. The beginning of the year, coffee commodity prices doubled. The reason? Combined effects of climate change and nature degradation. The two largest producing countries of coffee in the world, Brazil and Vietnam, were hit by climate extremes. But it is not a coincidence that Brazil and Vietnam has been the two countries promoting mostly the monoculture coffee system as the mainstream system to produce coffee. Monocultures equals biodiversity loss, not resilience to climate change. But coffee and cocoa are not just an exception. In a recent global scientific study published this summer by German scientists, they identified that in only the last 4 years, more than 15 different food supply chains had been heavily disrupted by climate extremes, especially heat waves, floods, and droughts. And this is not bad luck. Again, the combination of climate change and nature degradation. When you erode nature, you lose biodiversity. Biodiversity is the basis for life to adapt, is what provides adaptive capacity to our landscapes to adapt to the climate change and extreme events. Climate change has changed the thermodynamics of the planet, and this has clear consequences. Just remember one thing. For every degree that our climate gets warmer, and we have already crossed the 1 degree increase, for every degree that the climate gets warmer, our atmosphere contains 7% more moisture, more water. This translates in the fact that in the dry season, the atmosphere is going to suck 7% more water from our land systems. But this means that in the wet season, the atmosphere is going to throw 7% more water to our land. This is why droughts, heat waves, and floods are becoming more frequent and intense. Many times in the same country, many times in the same year. We are seeing that in Spain. Wildfires followed by floods. This is the new normal. So it is quite clear that in the next years, we need to rethink and transform our food systems for food security reasons, to build resilience in the system. And this includes transforming many of our landscapes and the supply chains that are related, that depend upon them. Like our Chief Programs Officer, Talia Smith, who is with us, likes to say, it is about simplifying the food supply chains and complexifying and enriching the landscapes. We have been doing the opposite in the last decades. We have been simplifying our landscapes through monocultures, synthetic inputs, and we have created very complicated supply chains with too many intermediaries and actors extracting value, preventing that value, that capital flows upstream to those that are the custodians of our landscapes, farmers, communities, etc. And also that this capital is not flowing towards the nature-based solutions that are the core of resilient systems. The bad news, is that we don't only need to rethink our food systems, we will need to transform many of our existing industries. This is what will happen, including our cities, and this will be one of the topics that we will be discussing later on, because also the way we have been designing, building, and living in our cities is one of the drivers of climate change and nature degradation. So to make it simple, having arrived at this tipping point, we really need to reinvent ourselves. We need to reimagine our world, and the best inspiration comes from nature. We need a new paradigm. We need new lenses to look at our world, like the Harmony book by His Majesty. We have one of the co-authors here, Ian Scully, says we need new lenses to interpret the world, to participate in the world, to live in the planet. And this new paradigm needs to start by understanding that nature does not belong to us. We belong to nature. And whatever we do to nature, we do it ourselves. These were the wise words of Chief Seattle a long time ago. So the new paradigm needs to be a nature-first paradigm because it is also a people's first paradigm. we are an integral part of nature. So this new paradigm needs to understand that nature is not a resource to extract. It's the keystone infrastructure supporting our planetary system, including our climate, the food we eat, the water we drink, the air we breathe. So nature is the web of life, the fabric supporting all living processes on Earth. And this includes all our economic activities. There are a lot of studies saying 50% of the GDP depends on nature. No, 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 no. 100% of the economy depends 100% on nature. This is why we need a new paradigm that understands, values, and invests in nature as what it is, the true engine of our economy. This new paradigm is crucial if we want to move from an extractive economy powered by fossil resources that has developed very much at the expense of nature, climate, and ourselves, towards a regenerative economy that is powered by nature but prospers in symbiosis with nature. And this is not just nice rhetoric. This is about understanding thousands of years of ancient wisdom and hundreds of years of modern science, biology, ecology, physics, chemistry, and complex science. This is about understanding that. It's about understanding the laws that govern our planet, because they are at the end conditioning our economy, like the laws of thermodynamics that I mentioned before. And this is a fundamental idea that I would like to share to understand why the nature-first economy is so important. Fundamentally, what we have been doing the last 200 years, during the industrial era, is that we have moved from an open economic system, open because prior to the industrial era, our activities depended on an external, reliable, constant source of energy, the sun. But through the Industrial Revolution and during the industrial era, we moved to a closed economic system depending on finite fossil resources that are internal to the system. When you use fossil resources to power your economy, you liberate a lot of energy. We have liberated a lot, but you also liberate entropic byproducts in the form of greenhouse emissions, which are sealing our atmosphere and creating a closed system. By doing that, and sorry to be a bit technical, you activate the so-called second law of thermodynamics, which is very simple. Free energy in a closed system results in disorder, entropy, irreversibility. All this is coming back to us in the form of environmental and economic risks. By the way, nature always works in open systems. There was a Nobel Prize winner, Ilya Prigogine, that won the Nobel Prize by demonstrating that nature needs openness to transform chaos and energy into order and entropy that is dissipated outside the system. So there is no other way, if we want to live in this planet, that go back to an open economic system relying on the sun. And this is not only about using renewable energy, which is important. It's about understanding that nature is our natural interface with the sun. Nature, what it does at the end of the day, is to transform sunlight into order, into life, into renewable biochemical molecules that we can utilize through our economy if we have the wisdom to do it and the regenerative approaches that are needed. This is basically what a nature-first economy, a circular bioeconomy is about. It's an economy that ultimately relies on the energy of the sun. It's about investing in biodiversity, nature-based solutions as basis for creating circular bioeconomy production and consumption systems that prospers within the planetary boundaries, within the renewable boundaries of the planet. So basically, it's creating an economy adjusted to the ecology of the planet. It's a very simple idea. And the good news is that we have a lot of knowledge, a lot of technologies. We have in this room a lot of organizations that are leading the so-called bioeconomy revolution. So we have the knowledge and technology to create an entire new economy anchored in nature-based solutions like regenerative farming, sustainable forestry, as basis for new circular bioeconomy value webs that can replace fossil-based supply chains in sectors like food, construction, fashion, packaging, chemicals. We can produce food replacing synthetic inputs by biological inputs. We will discuss that later. You can transform wood, the most versatile material on Earth, that is created by solar energy, by the way. We can transform that in wood engineering products that can replace concrete and steel at scale, transforming our buildings into carbon storage solutions. We have in this room also leading architects working with timber construction. we can transform wood and other biomaterials into textiles to replace polyester, very damaging for our health, creating microplastics and with a huge carbon footprint. We can even transform wood into a material called nanocellulose, which is stronger than steel, but much lighter. The first car made of nanocellulose was unveiled a few years ago in Japan, a car that is much lighter. So all these solutions are there. The challenge now is to finance them and to scale them up so that they move from being a niche to being the norm. And that is not going to be easy because we are talking about the greatest economic transformation in human history. If you look at the paradigm shift that requires and the change in terms of scale and speed that is really needed. But this was one of the main reasons that the Circular Bioeconomy Alliance was established, was founded by His Majesty, to help businesses, communities, and landscapes to put forward holistically the transition towards a nature-first economy. And to do that, we have activated a very simple model, and my colleague Talia will go into details. But basically, what we try to do in the CBA, we are very action-oriented. We want to activate knowledge, scientific, but also indigenous knowledge, to demonstrate the power of nature-based solutions and circular bioeconomy systems to transform landscapes and supply chains within different industries towards this nature-positive, nature-first economy. And we do that by working with international companies, local communities, and the scientific community. So quite simple. Just to show you an example, a few years ago, we developed one of the most successful living labs so far, sponsored by Giorgio Armani, who unfortunately, as you know, died a few weeks ago. This living lab was co-designed with the Sustainable Markets Initiative, especially with the Sustainable Fashion Task Force, which is led by Federico Marchetti. He is with us today, and maybe you can start opening the package. Okay, you're already open. Because, you know, what we did here is also very simple, and working with Federico has been very inspiring because as an entrepreneur, he follows very simple principles. So I told you before that one of the things we need to do in the future is simplify value chains, complexify, enrich landscapes. This is what we did here. Connect Giorgio Armani to potential landscapes from where they can source regenerative cotton that we will be producing while restoring biodiversity, mitigating climate change, improving the hydrological cycle. It was very simple. So we established a demonstration farm in 5 hectares. For 2 years, we showcase how we can produce cotton using agroforestry systems, combining cotton with trees and regenerative and biological inputs only. Giorgio Armani tested the quality of the cotton. I think it was good because now all the European shops of Giorgio Armani are selling T-shirts with the cotton that we produce. Federico, maybe you can share it. People can touch it. Give it back because it's quite expensive T-shirt. So, but this is just...
this is not just a T-shirt, no?
Yeah, you can explain maybe.
No, I mean, very quickly, just in order to be like a salesman. Even if Marc asked me to be. In 2 years from the idea generation to the final product in the boutiques.
Yeah.
So this is not just a T-shirt, it's just showing that action and tangible and concrete results are possible in a very short time, also because we cannot wait too long.
Exactly.
And yeah, it's a T-shirt, but I mean, for Armani, it's an important item because usually it was coming out of the blue T-shirt, so it's the iconic item for Armani. So they chose not just an item, but they chose the most important one. And it's in all boutiques. So for Christmas.
Yes. Thank you, Federico. Thank you very much for this. Yeah. So, Asha, just to conclude, so remember, I think one of my important messages is that a nature-first economy, a circular bioeconomy, is about understanding, valuing, and investing in nature as the true engine of our economy. It's about investing in nature to transform our economy rather than to offset for its failure. So we need to move from offsetting tactics to insetting transformative strategies. Remember that nature is our best strategy to manage the unavoidable, but also to avoid the unmanageable, the short term and the long term. And remember another thing, the worst part of climate change is not what we know, but what we don't know. But we know one thing, that nature has been delivering solutions for more than 1 billion years in this fantastic planet. And just to finish with a reflection, you need to know a little story. 1 minute, Asha. Before trees emerged in the planet and forests expanded, I am talking about 400 million years ago, the planet, life, climate were radically different. Before trees were on Earth, the climate was 10 degrees warmer than today, and the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere was 10 times what it is today. But with the expansion of trees and forests, the miracle happened. Because they follow ecologies of scale, and then the destiny of life and our own destiny changed. You know, trees are fantastic, I would not say technologies, but the most fascinating living organisms on Earth. Because what they do at the end is they use sunlight to transform water and CO2 into life, into order. So with the transformation that the expansion of forests triggered, the first mammals then appear on Earth. And our first ancestors evolved 7-8 million years ago inside the forest interacting with trees. So our physiognomy, our genetics is the result of millions of years of evolution inside a forest interacting with trees. So I am not surprised that, as Kathy Willis will inform us, that being close to trees, being in a forest has real positive impact for our health. And it's not surprising that the tree of life is a uniting symbol and architect across all religions, all cosmologies, all cultures in the world. You find it in the Bible, representing immortality, resurrection. Bishop Graham Usher, reading your book of Places of Enchantment, you are talking about how the tree of the cross represents resurrection, constant transformation. In the Upanishad, in the Hindu tradition, the inverted tree of life connects heavens and earth. In the Amazon cosmology, the tree of life represents the indivisibility between the spiritual and the physical, represents wisdom and knowledge. And in the Buddhist tradition is the path to enlightenment. And this is a very beautiful metaphor, because at the end of the day, a tree is the best organism to represent what nature is. Nature is the constant flow of energy from its purest form, sunlight, to its most complex form, which is life, and ultimately consciousness. But I would like to invent a new word that I think doesn't exist. Correct me if I am wrong. Because, trees are not only the path, our path to enlightenment. They are also, trees are, for light, the path to enlightenment. Because they transform light into life. I don't know if it exists, but otherwise, this could be one of the outcomes of the workshop. Thank you very much for your attention.